Good evening, everyone inside the Peace Project and anyone that's joining us for this special event this evening. So, in a moment, I will be welcoming Gayle Rowcroft. She's a life coach and she's someone that specialises in grief to come and share with us her story. So, Gayle, if you are there and you're watching this live, let me know and I will add you to this call on this very dark evening, as the clocks have changed in the UK here and everything gets dark so early. But no, it'll be good. Hopefully the technology will work and it'll allow you to join us. Just taking a few moments for it to come up. We've just tested the technology, so I know it works. Let's see, saying slow connection, hopefully not. Brilliant, there is Gayle, so let's bring you on, Gayle. There you are.
Hi.
Brilliant. So, welcome. Thank you so much for saying you'll do this for us inside the Peace Project tonight.
Pleasure.
It has been, the topic of grief has been really popular, and I just know it's that topic it touches everybody, whether it's that they're going through personal bereavement this year or just changes in lifestyles. And so I'm so delighted to have you here to navigate us through a little bit and share some of your experience. Hopefully help people feel a little bit better about potentially what they're going through, and also to give them a feeling that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You know, there are things you can do to support yourself. So let's start at the beginning. How did you become a coach and why did you focus on grief?
Well, it's interesting because I became a coach, a life coach, I suppose, started my coaching diploma journey the very next day after I'd been told that I was being made redundant from a role or a job at workplace that I'd been in for 26 years. So I went through the immediate shock that comes with that. And then I started my coaching journey the following day. So one would say that was probably very good timing, and that was during COVID. So I was furloughed, which was the reason I enrolled onto the coaching diploma, because my brain was getting a bit mushy, so I needed something to do that with. So that really was the start of my coaching journey, and throughout that I went through the diploma. I've done other types of techniques such as MBIT and core transformations and neuro-linguistic programming, and throughout all of that time I was still going through my own grieving process with redundancy. And what I found really helped throughout that is because when you do a coaching training course, you're very much becoming more and more self-aware, and you have the opportunity to practice your coaching on, you know, small to medium problems with other coaches. And what I found was just working with a really supportive group was actually just as important as the training that I was getting through the diploma to deal with some of the emotions that I was experiencing through the redundancy. And then I suppose I launched my business, but something still wasn't quite sitting right. A life coach was great, wanted to help as many people as I wanted to. And then quite honestly, last year was an awful time in terms of grief. My sister died in the March after prolonged illness. And then my dad became further ill. He already had Alzheimer's and COPD, and then he died in the August. And for anybody who's going through that, not only have you got one death that you probably haven't dealt with because you're pushing through to get the funeral ready, you know, supporting the nearest and dearest, such as the children, then you're going through it again with somebody you've already been grieving for because you're losing them while they're still alive because they have Alzheimer's. And so I've probably been grieving for him about 8 years prior to that anyhow, and then he dies, and then all of a sudden boom, after his death, there was just this, I described it as a tsunami of grief. And it wasn't just the grief for my dad, it was also the grief for my sister, but it was also the grief of my divorce, of a previous abusive relationship, of a promotion I didn't get, of my redundancy, of my brother who died when I was 11. All of these things that had happened within my life suddenly materialized again and just whacked me completely, really. It just floored me. So you still carry on and you still carry on. But there comes a point, especially if you're aware of your emotions, that I just came to a point where really I thought, I'm struggling to deal with all of this. I'm doing my best. I've had a lot of training. I'm very self-aware, great support network of friends, family, other coaches, but something's still not right. I'm still not managing to get my head above the water. I'm actually drowning here. And that's when I then actually engaged with a grief counsellor. And that is a bit different from grief coaching. So with the grief counsellor, what she helped me to do was really come to terms with all of the emotions that were coming, not just of the recent grief, but the things that I thought I'd actually already dealt with. And she helped me come to terms with that through very good work and process. And over that bit of time, what I also did was I decided to just take a bit of time out. I just thought, I can't do the work thing. I've still got one parent to look after. I need to come to terms with this. I need to allow myself to grieve, because I hadn't been able to do that for all of that time. So I was just being kind. I kind of knocked things on the head for a little while. I stopped the work, still took an interest in it, but I really took that time. And then as time went on, it was a lot of rest, a lot of recuperation, a lot of walking outside in nature. I have a dog, so I have to go out anyhow. That sometimes helps if you've got someone or something that is reliant on you. You still need to get yourself out of bed the next day. And I took some time to just read and be and actually engage in the sadness, the loss that I was experiencing. And I know, Becky, you posted the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model, which is so well known and it is very transferable in many ways when dealing with people and grief. And it highlights certain emotions such as the shock and the denial and the depression and eventually acceptance. But there's also these other things that start resonating. And the one that really hit me the most was the emotion of guilt. There was just, it was loaded. There was just so much of it. It was guilt of maybe not having done enough. Could I have done more to look after my dad? Could I have done more by visiting my sister more frequently, even though she was the other end of the country, still had responsibilities down here? Could I have done more to get that promotion? Could I have done more to make a relationship more successful? Could I have done more to free myself out of that abusive relationship earlier? And all of this resentment, regrets, the guilt of actually feeling a bit relieved that my dad had passed, because he wasn't in a good place. It was really quite distressing seeing him. And that sort of anticipatory grief is one that I know many people are going through. I mean, we're seeing that dementia is the biggest killer in the UK now. So when people have dementia or some kind of terminal illness, that grief of losing them before your eyes, that feeling of not being able to do or fix it or do enough about it, is really tough to deal with. And then of course you've got the grief afterwards as well, when the actual person has gone, they're not there anymore. So I think I've gone on a little bit further to your initial question, but it kind of all comes together. That's really what triggered my coaching journey. And then because I went through what I did last year, and because I gave myself time and had the counselling, and then started talking to more friends, family and other coaches, the thing that came to me and deep in my heart was I wanted to do something to honour my loved ones and to make something good, or turn something good from difficult experiences. And it just felt that the best way that I could do that is to share those experiences, give people permission to talk about grief. It can still be such a taboo subject, and grief is just as important as love. You know, it's part of the whole life cycle that we have as human beings. And there's also so many ways that it resonates within our life, because grief hangs around with change, and we are changing all the time.
Mm. Said about a tsunami of grief. If you don't mind, can you share what was that like for you? Like, how did you feel on a day-to-day basis? What made you know that that was grief?
Oh, good question. The things that I noticed the most was complete loss of energy. So there were physical and there were emotional side of things. There was a loss of energy. There was real disgust of even wanting to get out of bed in the morning. You know, I just wanted to stay cocooned. My duvet's always been a nice safe place for me, so I wanted to remain in that place. Sense of purpose had gone. My identity had gone. I felt helpless. I felt I hadn't done enough, so there was a lot of guilt and self-retribution, I suppose. There was a lot of inner critic that was taking place. But exhaustion was definitely a massive part of it. It was almost like there was just nothing left to give. It was empty. And I think the reason I knew that that was grief was, well, I've gone through grief in smaller chunks, if you like, in the individual, in the moment times. So I recognise how I personally react to loss. But it was the fact that I just couldn't change it myself. And and with the circumstances that all happened, it was clear to me that I needed to get some assistance, just to help me get my head back up above the waves so that I could see the shoreline to start swimming towards it, you know.
I remember seeing you sort of prior to your family members passing, and then last year, and because I think you used to teach people about dementia. Am I right in thinking that?
I'm a Alzheimer's ambassador for the Alzheimer's Society. So yeah, I do dementia briefings, if you like.
Yeah. And then I remember last year, and you were really candid, and you just shared really honestly that you were, you felt like you had a lot on your plate, and that's how I would describe you. You were on sort of reduced duties in a way, and I suppose from an outsider watching how it was for you, is that so much of your energy is taken up with processing the experiences that you're going through. It actually means you don't have a lot of resources for doing other things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good way of summing it up, actually. And throughout the year last year, it was all give. So, and I that the sensible thing to do is to do some exercise, take some time out for you, look after don't drink too much, don't eat the wrong things, all of these things, get plenty of sleep. But I suppose, and they are all correct, but at the same time, there is a practical element where sometimes it's just not possible. And again, the critic comes in of, I need to look after myself. I'm not looking after myself. But it becomes that your piece of elastic that's pulled so tight because you're trying to do so many things in looking after others, that something gives. And your self-care, unfortunately, is often the first thing that goes. So when you are in a position where you can actually just start capping things a bit and just saying, no, I have to reevaluate here, work out what I can just temporarily pause. It's just a pause. It doesn't mean stop. It doesn't mean bin. It could do. But in my experience, it was, I just needed to put things on pause to allow me to breathe. To allow me to just be kind to me. And that in itself is hard because you feel selfish and then you get more guilt. But actually, it was the only way to survive, to be honest.
And you talk about, like, when there's, a person passes, you talk about actually how much there is to do.
Yes.
And yeah, and it's something that potentially you've never done before as well. So there's possibly a level that it's just not familiar. And you've got all this grief on top of it. It's really a tough time, isn't it, to have to process all of that, plus make arrangements. And then also, quite often, I mean, I feel like our society isn't well set up to support people with grief. I almost think we go, oh gosh, they're going through a tough time, I'm going to leave them on their own, which is the worst thing, surely, that can happen when you actually need that support more than ever.
Yeah, there's different kinds of support thrown in there, isn't there? There's the practical element of what on earth am I meant to do next, and depending on the circumstances, if there's hospital team or a care facility team, then hopefully they can point you in the right direction, as they did with me. But then you have got the whole thing of the funerals, the eulogy, the memorial, the notification to people. That's incredibly difficult because you're still raw, but you know that there's plenty of other loved ones out there that need to know at the earliest point. There's the immediate support to, in my case, was my mum in particular. And actually, it often lands on one or two people to be that central person that holds people together and is the person that is there and organizes things. And I guess the only way that I managed to really do that was I had to disassociate myself from my own grief at that point. It was almost like I needed to ask my heart that feeling of loss and the loss of love, that had to be just quietened down for a bit so that my head could really engage and say, okay, these are the practical things I need to do. And then my gut was the one that was driving me to get the stuff done. But that also comes with a little bit of a warning in the fact, and I do say this to businesses in particular, to HR departments, just because the funeral's happened and that person's come back to work doesn't mean that they've actually done any of their grieving, or that, it's stopped, it's end, that everything can just get back to normal. That's not the case. Often the actual grieving for that person and others doesn't happen until way down the line, when time allows people to do that. The thing that does help with is having that support network, is having some of the practicalities done. So with the arrangements of funerals, if you know what the person's requests are, if they've got a will, if they've got their power of attorneys in place, all of those practical things, if that can be done prior to that loss, that does help. And that actually is one of the nicest gifts you can give to the people you're leaving behind, because it takes all that concern and worry away. But it's also not being afraid to ask for help and to say to your friends and your family, and in my case, my networking group and my co-coaching groups, I'm struggling here a little bit, please just bear with me, and to let them just be there when you need them. And also, if you've got somebody going through it, it's to let them know that you are there for them and they're there to listen anytime. Because you're right, sometimes I always remember my mum saying, when she lost my brother, who was 17 at the time, people physically crossed to the other side of the road just to avoid saying anything because they didn't know what to say. It was almost too difficult for them. And the best thing you can actually say is, I'm here for you.
Right. Yeah. Useful. What did you learn, having gone through your various grief processes? Because we're not just about bereavement of people, but you talked about the end of your relationship, you talked about your redundancy, so change in job situation. I'm going to guess that may be a change in financial situation.
Absolutely.
Or it can be a grief if you move to a new location and you've left, behind a town or city you love. So what did you find useful? What did you learn last year that you'd like to share with other people?
Yeah, what I would love to say is find time for yourself, but I know there's going to be people rolling their eyes to that, as I would have done in that situation, because you can't always do it. So the best thing is actually acknowledge the emotions that you are experiencing it. If you try to bury it or put it away in a box, particularly if it's for a long length of time, it can actually be really damaging to you, physically, emotionally, mentally. So what I really did start to do was just have an outlet, someone I could continuously have a dialogue, somebody I could rage at if I wanted to. I did actually also, which I never normally do, was I did actually journal a few times. And that wasn't to note down my daily experiences. It was when there was stuff in my head that I wouldn't necessarily want to verbalize to anybody else, absolute frustration. And I would just offload it quite often at the end of the day, so that when I went to bed, I was actually more able to sleep, because all of that pent up anger, frustration, sadness, whatever it might have been that I was feeling on that particular moment, or all of it, it could just go somewhere, and it wasn't going to cause any harm when it went somewhere. And I also found that, you know, the word journaling for some people is a bit heavy, such as, oh, I've got to have a book, I've got to have a pen, I've got to sit down and spend that time. Well, actually, I did some of it just on voice messages when I was walking the dog. If something just happened, I just blurted it out onto my phone, because most of us do have that facility, and it's more to hand. So there's ways that you can actually do that, and you can always delete it. You don't have to keep it. It's about getting it out of here, so that you can get some clarity there, rather than it having all of this noise that comes with types of grief. And I would say that's something that was useful all the way through, whether it was a loss of a promotion that I got, which had quite significant impact, because we were relocating home-wise, so there was the house move involved in that as well. There was the redundancy, the divorce as well, and it's being able to disassociate at the right time, and by that I mean just take the emotion away and think practically. But it's really important that at some point you let the emotion back in and you deal with it, you acknowledge how you're feeling and sit with it, and don't feel ashamed of it. There's a lot, it's almost like you're not allowed to grieve. You are, absolutely. It's important. Our cultures are all different in how we exhibit it, but it's a very natural process of life. And by having any kind of loss, even if you just lose your car keys, you go through some of the emotions, you know, of denial of where you landed them and can't believe that you've lost them, etc., etc. But you know, when you grieve, when you're really struggling with that, mourn, deal with that emotion, just let it happen, let it flow. And then once you've done that mourning, once you've acknowledged it, memorialized it in some way, you can then actually heal, and then you can start living your life, the new life that you got, because acceptance comes with it. So yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask you, is there happiness after loss?
Yes, there is. Loss is loss. You know, it's always there with you, and there isn't a thing of grieving starting and then ending. It just you start to heal and live with it more. There are still times when, I mean, my brother died in 1986, and there are still times when I just get caught completely off guard with a huge emotion, and it can be triggered easily. A piece of music, a type of car, a scent, you know, something that you end up associating with it. I'll give an example of that. When Chris, if you're Strictly Come Dancing fans, Chris was doing a dance a couple of weeks ago to You'll Never Walk Alone. Well, that happened to be the song played at my brother's funeral. So I had to leave the room. It's a really big trigger for me. So I removed myself. So I'm still dealing with those sort of things even after this length of time. So, you know, it's acknowledging it, it's being aware of it, and working with it.
Yeah. I know we could talk all night because it's
Yes.
such a big topic and you've
Yeah.
got such a wealth of knowledge, but just really quickly, what with a grief coach, what can you expect if you were choosing to work with someone like yourself? You know, what things are you able to offer people?
The main thing with any kind of coaching is it's an independent space, is a very safe space where you can talk as openly, as freely as you want to about what you want to talk about. The thing I would encourage with people with grief is that there is no set format. Everybody is different. We're all individuals. Our circumstances are different. My loss of my dad will be different to somebody else's loss of their dad. My reaction would be different to somebody else's reaction. So it's an opportunity for somebody to, again, engage with those emotions, and actually the coach will help that person see how they can benefit from those emotions, how they can add value to their life going forwards, how by finding some kind of acceptance that it will actually enhance their life going forwards, rather than being seen as something negative. It's actually really positive opportunity to take that and turn it into a not a good experience, but a good for your life going forwards.
So bringing in balance, really, that's what I'm hearing, is instead of walking through a cloud for the rest of your life, but finding some kind of harmony or peace with your loss, peace with your emotions, peace, you know, your reality, which is what we're all about in the Peace Project. So
absolutely, yeah, that's a very nice segue, and it's giving you a nice toolkit to use going forwards. That's another important part that you get from the coaching, because as I mentioned, it's not just done and dusted. Grief, whether it's remembrance of the old or new experiences, what the coaching does is it gives you a toolkit to help you manage it next time around.
And that's what I was ask is, like, now you've been through this process, you've been through it consciously, do you feel a bit more confident the next time you'll be faced with a bereavement that you actually have a framework to work within?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the resilience that's there, because you've gone through it before, you've done it, you come out the other side, and they've all taken different lengths of time, slightly different techniques, etc. But absolutely, there is life after grief. And like I say, you can make that grief process a good, positive experience for your life going forward.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Gayle. For all of those who've been watching us live, I hope this has been useful. And I'm sure if you've got any questions, if you want to pop them underneath the video, that Gayle will come back and she'll answer any questions that you've got.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Becci.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you soon, Gayle.
Thank you. Yeah, speak soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.